Hi everyone, my name is Danika Barker and I teach high school English at Central Albion Collegiate Institute in St. Thomas, and as you know, yes, is the home of Rachel McAdams. I love my job, and what I am here today to talk to you guys about is the surprises that I found using social networking in education, but really what I'm talking about is the surprises that came from my students. Now, one of my favorite quotes comes from this guy who's been mentioned a lot, and it is, if you are afraid to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. And that's become a bit of a mantra for me, and every day I really hope that Sir Ken Robinson is right about that, because I am pretty sure that I'm wrong on about a daily basis. Yep. But actually, sometimes being wrong is not such a bad thing, because the things that you can be wrong about can end up being really positive surprises. So teenagers, for example, I work with grade 11 and 12 students. They've surprised me a lot over the past year and a half. Now, I've been teaching longer than a year and a half, but it's really in the past year and a half that they've surprised me. And this probably isn't a tough sell for you, because teachers are probably among, you may not know this, but among the few and the proud who can walk through a shopping mall with crowds and mobs of teenagers and be completely confident. Doesn't faze you at all, right? Okay, so probably not a tough sell for you, but you probably know that teenagers have gotten a lot of bad press lately, right? They bully each other. They text too much. They text and drive. They sext. They post really inappropriate content on Facebook. They have no respect for the due date. And they will write a great essay on Hamlet and then use LMFAO and a smiley face. Yeah, it happens. They do all those things. It's true. They do all those things. But that is not all they do. And so I kind of want to talk about that other part. So I am a geek. And I haven't always been a geek, at least not a techie geek. I was a theater geek first, and then I became a techie geek. And I became a techie geek very innocently when I worked as a literacy learning coordinator. And what I was interested in finding out was how literacy and technology could intersect in really interesting ways. So it was perfect timing for me when a colleague of mine told me about how he was using Facebook with his at-risk students to study of mice and men. So I was really interested in this. They were taking on the profiles of characters in Of Mice and Men. They were interacting on Facebook as these characters. They were writing status updates, they were joining groups, and they were doing really, really engaging stuff. And so my job as a learning coordinator was to think about, how can I share this with other teachers? But there was a bit of a problem with that, right? Facebook is, at best, it usually gets a pretty chilly reception in a lot of schools. And at worst, it's usually banned by internet filters. So, although the students know how to get around it, but you can't really use it as a teaching tool. So, I tried to think about alternatives that I could use so that I could replicate that same kind of project, but without using Facebook. And that's what led me to Ning. So, Ning is actually what I've been presenting on this week. The cool thing about Ning is it allows you to mimic a lot of the stuff that you can do on Facebook, but you can create your own network that's only open to the people that you invite. And so that made me a little bit more comfortable about the fact that my students might be role-playing, so they're not misrepresenting themselves in a public site. Now, the only trick, of course, was I had to wait until I could get back in the classroom to try it myself. So if you flash forward a little bit, I'm now back in the classroom. And as sort of time went on and we became more comfortable with the technology and what we could do with it, we used our Nings for a variety of different purposes. And the first time we used it, I wanted to copy what my friend Phil did, and so we created Facebook profile pages for the characters in The Great Gatsby. And the students would do things like creating a profile for their characters. They would write on each other's walls. They would interact just like you would on Facebook, but as though Facebook were around during the 1920s, and Daisy and Jay Gatsby and everybody else, they're all talking to each other and interacting. So they join groups like, I have been to a Gatsby party, Soldiers of World War I, and finally I ended up having them actually write blog posts to sort of demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the point that they were at in the story. So this is one of my students' Facebook pages as Nick Carraway. Then, as we sort of became more comfortable with how the site worked, we actually used it as literature circle support so that we could move our literature circles beyond the bricks and mortar of the school. So at first, the site actually functioned a little bit more like a study guide, and students would upload content, links to resources that would help each other study the books that they were reading in class. And then it's moved on to the point where the students would, after we did our literature circle meeting, we would go down to the computer lab, and then students would blog about their books. And this way, the students who were reading different books could learn from the students who were reading a different book. Okay. And they would actually also post comments on each other's blogs and then comment back. And so it was a way for them to really deepen their knowledge. And then when I got really comfortable with it, Jamie and I actually collaborated, and we both taught media. So we had our 2 media classes as members of the same name. And so they actually interacted with each other. They were involved in the same conversations about similar topics. They commented on each other's blog posts and really made some interesting connections and found some common ground, even though they came from very different backgrounds. So we're from St. Thomas down here in the south, and Listowel's way up there in the north. Not way up there. Now, here is the thing that really surprised me, though, about the whole process. When the students created their Facebook-style pages, not every student actually embraced the idea. I'd assumed that because this was a type of communication that they did outside the classroom all the time, that the transition to using it inside the classroom was going to be a really seamless one. What I realized, however, is that these academic students were quite suspicious of using tools that they weren't used to having academic success with before, no matter how interesting or engaging it was. So in that way, actually, students are not all that different from our colleagues, because you have to be able to make new experiences low risk. You have to have time to play. You have to be able to experiment, and you have to be able to problem solve. You need to feel free to make mistakes without being penalized. So that was part of the learning process for me. Now, when my students blogged, a lot of them were initially very shy about sharing their writing with the rest of the class for fear of judgment. And that really took me by surprise, because everything I'd read led me to believe that if I wanted to engage students, I had to create authentic writing opportunities for them. And writing for the teacher was not an authentic task. But I didn't consider the fact that while writing for the teacher may be inauthentic, it's safe. So as time passed, the students actually gained confidence, and they were really excited to check their blogs. They couldn't wait to see the feedback from their peers. And one of my favorite blog posts came from a student that I taught last year, Alicia, and she wrote this blog post called I Have Grown. And what she was really shy at the beginning of the year. She hated the thought of using computers, first of all, and she really hated the thought of sharing her work with students. At the end of the year, she reflected back on her feelings at the beginning of the year and how she now felt like she was a much more confident writer. She felt proud of her skills as a writer, and she attributed a lot of that to the feedback that she got from her peers. Now, our social networking sites allowed students to comment, question, and make connections, extending their understanding in such a way that I was no longer the keeper of all knowledge. And I know that that can actually be kind of a disconcerting place for a teacher to be. Sometimes I actually felt like I wasn't doing any work. I wasn't working hard enough, because the students were actually doing all the work, and I just got to sit back and let it happen. And it didn't happen at first, but eventually it got to be that way. And that's actually a kind of scary feeling, but it's also a really good feeling. The thing that I started to realize was that I had to get away from the idea that it was my job to teach the students The Great Gatsby. Because let's face it, after grade 11, their knowledge of the plot of The Great Gatsby might help them out during a night of Jeopardy, but that's probably it. So instead, they developed problem-solving and critical thinking skills that they'd be able to use in the future, even if they never studied English again. I guess my biggest surprise was the most positive one. My biggest concern when I started using social networking sites was that I'd have lots of issues of bullying. Conventional wisdom taught me that the perceived anonymity of the internet would lead students to say things online that they would never actually say face-to-face. Now, our site wasn't open to the public, so the students weren't completely anonymous, but they did say things online that they wouldn't have said face-to-face. They were kind. They were supportive. They moved beyond the cliques and the little social groups that existed within our school and within the classroom, and supported each other in ways that really took me by surprise. And I hope that by modeling the positive and constructive use of technology, students will practice better digital citizenship in their everyday lives. I know that teachers were hesitant sometimes to try new things without completely understanding how the new thing works. But we expect our students to try new things that they don't completely understand every day. And if we encourage our students and our colleagues to take positive risks in a supportive environment, we just might surprise ourselves. Thank you.